Good evening, everyone. This is Vice Mayor Michelle Shoresman, and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the San Luis Obispo City Council to order and state that all members are present with the exception of Mayor Erica A. Stewart. Would Councilmember Marks please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Be happy to. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks. And looking forward to the meeting this evening. We're going to start with the presentation. We have a proclamation for Hunger Awareness Day, and I'll go ahead and read the proclamation, and then I think Miss Molly Kern is here to receive it. Whereas hunger profoundly undermines the health and well-being of both our community at large and individual neighbors, and whereas approximately a third of households in San Luis Obispo County are struggling to afford the cost of living in our region, and whereas more than 6,700 children in San Luis Obispo County are suffering from food insecurity, jeopardizing their growth, health, and academic success, and whereas nearly a quarter of local seniors are struggling to meet their basic needs, and whereas the SLO Food Bank provides food for over 150 organizations, including nonprofits, education programs, and local government teams, thereby forming a critical network that distributes nutritious, life-sustaining food to those who face hunger. And whereas the SLO Food Bank serves over 39,000 neighbors in need each month across San Luis Obispo County, from Napomo to San Miguel, and from San Simeon to California Valley. And whereas the SLO Food Bank distributes millions of nutritious meals to families, seniors, children, and people in need annually. And whereas the steadfast commitment of our community to Hunger Awareness Day, June 6th, 2025, will be instrumental in raising the funds and awareness required to alleviate hunger and build a healthier community in San Luis Obispo County. Now, therefore, I, Michelle Shoresman, Vice Mayor of the City of San Luis Obispo, on behalf of the entire City Council, proclaim that on Hunger Awareness Day, we call upon the community members of the City of San Luis Obispo to acknowledge the urgency of food insecurity, to contribute generously to hunger relief, and to participate in a concerted effort to ensure that no child, adult, or senior goes hungry in our community. I'll meet you at the podium.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Thank you so much, Vice Mayor Shoresman and council members. Food insecurity is something that happens behind closed doors, and there's really no way to know if your colleague, your child's friend, or even the person who's bagging your family's groceries is struggling to access nutritious food themselves. So on Hunger Awareness Day, we open those doors to make sure that the thousands of our neighbors in need know that they're not alone and that the entire county is working to alleviate hunger and build a healthier community. Since the start of COVID and persisting to this day, our community is experiencing food insecurity at a level we've not yet seen in our 36-year history. Believe it or not, when the SLO Food Bank was started, it was volunteers who had transformed an old ice cream truck into a nutritious food truck, and it was completely volunteer powered. They couldn't have imagined where we would be today, serving nearly a sixth of SLO County residents, but here we are. And it's because of the incredible community support and collaboration that we get to experience every day at the SLO Food Bank. But right now, the SLO Food Bank and each of our hunger relief partners are responding to more than a 16% surge in demand for our services. We are so honored to provide compassionate, nutritious hunger relief to tens of thousands of SLO County residents through both our direct hunger relief efforts, as well as the network of more than 70 independent nonprofits whose kitchens and pantries we stock, including Haslo, Salvation Army, 40 Prado, Access Support Network, Transitions Mental Health Association, and numerous churches right here in the city of SLO. Believe it or not, there are 21 of our 70 nonprofit partners are located in the city. And so during this year's Hunger Awareness Day, we are excited to welcome each of you and the entire community to our warehouse for a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to distribute nearly 5 million pounds of food in a year. Our hope is that this open house provides an opportunity to connect with others who share our vision for a hunger-free SLO, to learn about our work to meet the need for additional hunger relief during the summer months when families and children don't have the school support that they get during the academic year, and to celebrate the enormous impact that we have when we work together. Hunger is very much a part of our local community. It touches each and every neighborhood, our schools, our workforce, and our seniors. And in our community, the solution is also local, in the compassionate hearts of our generous neighbors who donate their time, talent, and treasure to our caring mission. More than 70% of our operating budget is supported by local individuals and businesses who provide consistency to ensure that our work will continue regardless of state or federal uncertainty. We are so grateful to be this community's food bank. So thank you again for your kindness, for helping to share this story, and for the support that you provide to our mission, not only on Hunger Awareness Day, but throughout the year. Thank you.
And thank you for all you do for our community, helping feed so many in need. Okay, next we'll move on to an introduction of Matthew Pennon, our new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager. Deputy City Manager Greg Herman, would you like to present our new manager for us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vice Mayor and council members. I'm very happy to introduce Matt Pennon as the city's new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager. In his role, Matt will lead a citywide effort to foster a more inclusive and equitable organization and community. Matt brings over a decade of public sector experience with him, including his time at the Santa Barbara County Department of Social Services and most recently at the San Luis Obispo County Behavioral Health Department, where he served as the DEI manager. Matt's originally from the Central Coast. He left after high school to attend college at Chico State, but we won't hold that against him, and spent several years living and working in the Bay Area before returning home with a renewed commitment to local public service. Matt also brings a lot of lived experience to this role, and we're super grateful to have Matt's family here this evening as well. And with all of that, a true appreciation for the power for compassionate, intentional leadership to create meaningful change. And with that, I'm really happy to introduce Matt.
Thank you for that, Greg. Thank you, council members, Vice Mayor Shoresman. I am extremely honored and privileged to be here. This role is something that is not only professionally something very exciting for me, but also something very personal. Growing up on the Central Coast in Santa Barbara, but now calling San Luis Obispo my home. Please don't hold it against me that I don't live here, but I love working here. And my family and I spend a lot of time here in the city. So there's a deep passion to make San Luis Obispo the beacon of diversity, equity, inclusion. And those words are not just something that we say, it's something that I want embedded in everything that we do. The foundation has been set here within the city, and it is my goal to continue on growing that. San Luis Obispo, the city of, is a place, and it is important that we make sure that everything that we do is intentional, that all residents, whether they're visitors or they live here or work here, are included, they belong, and not just a feeling, but this is an actual action. I want to make sure that it is something that happens on a daily basis. And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to working with each of you and with everybody within the organization, as well as within the city and the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Looking forward to working with you in this new capacity. I was actually lucky to work with Matt at the county, and so now he's switching roles, and I'm looking forward to working with you again. All right, we will move on to the city manager report. So City Manager McDonald, if you'd like to present the report.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks so much. We have a few items we want to make sure everyone's aware of for this report. Of course, really happy to reiterate and announce that our Laguna Lake Dog Park opened on Friday, May 30th, and these are true-to-life photos of the event. Our original 3-acre property was in an unfenced off-leash dog area that had minimal amenities for the past 25 or so years. And so we were really excited to really replenish and renew the space, make it a true dog park that is fully enclosed and has separate spaces for dogs based on kind of size and perhaps energy level, depending on if that's how you want to take it. It maintains the 3-acre footprint with 2 acres of fenced space for large-sized dogs and another 1-acre fenced area for small-sized dogs. Each area has an ADA pathway, picnic tables, and mixes of grass, bark, and pea gravel that includes some dog play structures built by students from Pacific Beach High School and their shop classes in partnership with our local nonprofit, Friends of Slow City Dog Parks, which is a really amazing example of what we can do when we come together to build amenities for our community. So our dog park is now open 7 days a week from dawn to dusk. And if you want any more information, please go to slowparksandrec.org. And again, we're really excited and happy that we get to see our furry friends out there exercising and having fun. Next, we wanted to provide some updates on a couple of meetings that are happening next week. These are being offered by Slow Transit, and we want to make sure everyone's aware. Every 3 years, Slow Transit is required to establish a goal for disadvantaged business enterprise participation as part of the Federal Transit Administration funded contracts. This goal-setting process ensures that firms owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals have a fair opportunity to compete for our transportation contracts. It also helps our agencies establish data-driven participation goals that reflect market availability and remove barriers. And so that meeting will be held on June 9th. There will be 2 sessions, one in the afternoon at 1:30 and an evening session at 5:30 in our library community room across the street here. And so if anybody's interested, please check that out. The next meeting will be held on June 11th. That's part of our Title VI program update process. That ensures that transit agencies continue to comply with federal non-discrimination requirements. We look at our documentations of services and policies to make sure that we're providing equitable access to all populations, including minority and limited English proficient communities. So we're required to do this update regularly, which is a great idea, of course, to make sure we're assessing changes in our demographics and we improve public outreach and adjust as we need to. So please, if you're interested, check those meetings out. Again, on June 11th, we're taking a similar approach, having an afternoon session at 1:30 p.m. and an evening session at 5 p.m. Also at the library community room. But if you're not able to attend those meetings, copies of our draft plans will be posted on the Slow Transit's website and made available in print at our mobility services office at the and at 919 Palm Street and in our city clerk's office. So public comment on the draft plans will be accepted for 30 days from those respective meeting dates. And then we will finalize the goals and the program and bring those back for council approval. It's currently scheduled for September 2nd. So just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of those opportunities and process. Next, we wanted to highlight and make sure everyone's aware that our Parks and Recreation Department is offering an arts and crafts summer camp. We have dates coming up in June through July. We're offering weekly themed art classes for ages 4 to 6 and then 6 through 12. Again, throughout June and July, those dates are up on the screen. So for more information, or if you'd like to register, please visit our website at slowrecactivities.org, or you can call 805-781-7300 for more information on how to sign up. Next, we're highlighting something that it was a really fun opportunity for our staff to do at a local elementary school. Last week, our Public Works and Police Departments had the pleasure of attending the Los Ranchos Elementary School's very first Career Day. And the event kicked off with a vehicle roundup. This allowed kids TK through third grades to get an up-close look at our fleet and learn how these vehicles help us serve the community every day. Later in the day, our staff visited fourth grade classrooms to share more about our capital improvement program, just what every fourth grader asks about. Love it. And then students took part in a fun and very relatable challenge. They were asked how to spend a limited budget. Also love it. I expect to see them applying for jobs here in a few years. They had to choose between building a park, buying a fire engine, or paving roads. So maybe they will also consider running for office in the future, which is also amazing. In the end, all of the students came to the same conclusion. They wanted to do all the projects and wish they had more money. All relatable, very relatable. It was a really great introduction to how we prioritize resources, what we do here at the city, all the care and consideration that's put into budgeting and making things work, and how we make thoughtful decisions in the best interest of the community. So we just wanted to take an opportunity to highlight some of the amazing opportunities that we get to share our work with the community, and then really say thank you to our staff and our partners at Los Ranchos Elementary for giving us the opportunity to be out there and talk with their students. Next, we wanted to make sure everyone is aware that we have a bit of a construction project that is kicking off downstairs, and it's allowing us to do some much needed remodels for our finance and IT departments. The result is that we needed to relocate our staff for a period of time while that remodel is happening. And so we've moved our finance department public counter across the street to 919 Palm. So that's where you would go if you needed permits from community development as well. So if you have any needs for finance-related help at our counter, please make note. And certainly we have signage up so everybody's aware as well that they can be assisted across the street at 919 Palm. The hours of operation will be the same Monday through Thursday, currently Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5 p.m. And this doesn't change any of the ways that our finance department is otherwise operating and being available to the public. We do have staff both in our finance department and our IT departments redeployed elsewhere in the city. So we have some folks over at the Ledwood Community Center for a limited time while we complete that construction. But please know that we're still here to help. You can access payments online was another option. Some of that information's up here on the screen. We're also available by phone, by email, in all the same ways. It's just our counter has transitioned across the street. And next, we wanted to, again, remind folks, this is a similar slide to what we talked about at our last council meeting. Every year, we make adjustments to our user fees and impact fees based typically on CPI increases. This change that's going into effect on July 1st includes a slightly different approach for our user fees based on what we adopted last year, which was to phase in some of those fees over time. And so some of the fees that we're going to increase by more than 50% and more than $10. We delayed those full increases until now, so you'll see those updated. And then others will increase by CPI. Impact fees will increase by CCCI, which is a construction cost index, and those percentages are listed on the screen. The full new schedule will be posted this week, so if it isn't up already, it will be any moment, I think, and that all those fee changes will go into effect July 1st. If you have any questions, slowcity.org/fees, there will be more information there, and certainly feel free to reach out to any staff members. And then finally, we just have a quick preview of our next council meeting. We have a number of consent agenda items. A number of them are fairly standard and annual, which includes the multi-dwelling property fire life inspection fees. Unclaimed check funds, which is a standard process for us. We'll be advertising or seeking authorization to advertise our monitoring well project as part of our groundwater contamination cleanup project. We're dealing with some fire fleet assets. The second reading of our airport area specific plan ordinance. We'll be making sure that our transit program capital project funding amounts are being appropriated properly. Authorizing application for a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant application for the Foothill Complete Streets project, which we're really excited to move forward and hopefully receive some funding to help bring that project to completion. And then we will be talking about proposing a parking penalty schedule update to address a couple of state laws that have gone into effect. One related to EV charging spaces and the other related to what's called the daylighting law, which requires or prohibits parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk to help make sure that pedestrians who are crossing are more easily seen. So we want to make sure we have what we need in order to help enforce those state provisions. We are very optimistic that we will be able to bring forward our successor MOU with our SLOCIA bargaining unit and our successor resolution for our unrepresented and management employees. And then optimistic we'll be able to bring forward the second reading of the ordinance that we will be introducing tonight, or hopefully introducing. And then our main items are hearings for our water rates and wastewater rates, and a presentation for approval of our financial plan. So those are two really big items. Perhaps the budget, from some perspectives, most important thing that our council does. And so this is really a culmination of many months of work and lots of discussion at the council level. So that's it for the city manager report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, City Manager McDonald. Is there any questions or comments from my colleagues? It's a quiet group this afternoon. Okay, so we'll move on then with public comment for items not on the agenda. So I'd like to call for public comment. If you haven't turned in a speaker card and you want to speak on an item that's not on the agenda, so not on consent and not a hearing item, now is the time to turn in your cards. And if you haven't turned in a card, please do so now. And City Clerk, do we have any speakers for items not on the agenda?
No, we do not.
Okay. Well, then we will move on to consent agenda. The consent calendar is items that consist of matters deemed routine and non-controversial by staff. Not less important, though, that's for sure. Unless a member of council wishes to pull an item for individual consideration, all items will be approved by one motion. So I guess first I should ask if any of my colleagues have any items that they would like to pull. And I see Councilmember Marks.
Yes, I would like to pull 5D, which is consideration of the 25-26 Human Services Grant Funding Recommendations.
Okay, so we're pulling 5D, and I saw your light go off.
Same item.
Okay, and I wanted to discuss that one as well. So I guess we'll be pulling 5D, and we will take public comment on the consent agenda except for item D, 5D. Is there any, City Clerk, are there any public commenters for other items on consent?
No, there are not.
Okay, so with that, I guess we are ready for a motion on the consent agenda. Councilmember Francis?
I move to approve the consent agenda minus item 5D.
And Councilmember Boswell?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilmember Francis and a second by Councilmember Boswell to approve the consent agenda. City Clerk, would you like to call the roll?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes, and the motion passes 4-0. And so now we will take up item 5D, which is the consideration of the 25-26 Human Services Grant funding recommendations. And who would like to begin? Councilmember Marks, since you were the first one to pull it, did you want to start the discussion?
How do you want to handle it? Go straight to questions?
Does staff have a presentation, or does staff want to make any comments before we ask questions?
We're happy to answer any questions the council has. And in addition, we have the HRC chair here this evening as well, who can speak to some of the deliberations as well if requested.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions for either the chair or staff?
No, I think the agenda correspondence was very thorough, and so any questions that I had were answered at that time. So after we hear from the public, then we can do deliberation.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Okay, so we will take public comment on this item then.
Okay, we have 4 speakers. The first one is Nathan Rubinoff, then Marina Bernheimer, and then it will be Donna Hare Price.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Rubinoff. I'm the Data and Systems Manager for the Homeless Services Division of CAPSLO, and I'm here on behalf of my agency to say thank you to the City of San Luis Obispo for the $20,000 allocated to our homelessness prevention program as a part of the Human Services Council's allocation. Prevention is a key point in homeless services to intervene and have an outsized impact on our clients' lives before they fully enter homeless services and they need a higher level of care, such as those at 40 Prado or even permanent supportive housing or experience street homelessness. In 2024, our prevention program and stabilization was able to help 49 individuals from becoming homeless. In 2025 so far, we've been able to assist about 20 individuals from becoming homeless. Your contribution has an outsized impact on outcomes for our community members, and it allows CAPSLO to take effective action at a critical time. This grant is also especially important because it doesn't have requirements that some of our state and federal dollars do about housing type, and allows us to pay for clients to get into places like sober livings. It also allows us to serve community members that might not be documented and have stricter requirements to funders. Thank you very much for your contribution and continued support of CAPSLO and our homeless services team.
Thank you. The next speaker?
Marina Bernheimer, Donna Hare Price, and Jason Main. Sorry.
Hi, good evening. My name is Marina Bernheimer, and I'm the Executive Director of SLO CASA. At CASA, we serve children who have been removed from their homes due to severe abuse and neglect and placed into the foster care system. Really appreciate your consideration of our funding proposal tonight. Wanted to make sure that you are aware of the connection between homelessness and CASA. About 40% of kids who age out of foster care become homeless, and we understand that from well-documented data nationwide. However, we We also know from a study that was longitudinally done by the University of Houston that when a child has a CASA volunteer at their side, those homeless rates are significantly reduced. CASA volunteers make sure that kids aging out of foster care know how to apply for jobs, know how to apply for college, apply for financial assistance, and achieve the stability that they otherwise wouldn't have in their lives without a CASA volunteer. We're asking for about 15% of the total cost of our rent, and wanted to be sure that you understood the connection between rent. CASA volunteers are not allowed legally to bring children to their homes, so they need a confidential and comfortable place to meet with their CASA youth, and our office provides that space. We have couches and confidential meeting rooms that are developmentally appropriate. We provide laptops for youth at our office to apply for jobs and apply for apartments, and this isn't something that can happen in a cafe or a public space, so it's really vital that we have this space available. Also want to share with you that this comes at a time when we are facing extreme cuts at every level. You probably saw the article in the Tribune about our county funding cuts. National CASA was defunded by the federal administration last month with no notice, so National CASA has been completely defunded, and we're facing cuts from the county level and the city level and the federal level. Our individual donations are also down right now based on environment of uncertainty. So I really appreciate your consideration of our funding request. Thank you.
Donna Hare-Price and Jason Main.
Hi, good evening, staff and council. I'm here to talk about fully funding the CASA grant. I can tell you all about statistics of what we know about how many folks are homeless and the impacts of foster care on our youth. But instead, I'm going to tell you a personal story. I operated a Free State preschool in San Luis Obispo, serving the neediest children in SLO County, and many were students in foster care program. CASA was an ally and a partner for our program, and I watched CASA volunteers provide a secure, stable, functioning adult relationship with children that often it was hard to find in anywhere else. They were that secure anchor that allowed students to thrive and succeed. It is very difficult to measure the amount of a human life, but we know that keeping our children safe and providing funding for our most vulnerable is not only a priority of our city, but also of us as human and our humanity. So please, please grant funding to CASA at the highest amount possible. Thank you.
Jason Main is our final speaker.
Good evening. My name is Jason Main. I run a nonprofit sober living facility called Middle House that's been in continuous operation here in San Luis Obispo since 1966. It has helped thousands of men start their recovery journey and stay sober. Locals like Dave Davis, who runs the San Luis Obispo County Drug Court, he started at Middle House. Van Carrazza, who runs Operation Surf, a local nonprofit, he moved into Middle House, decades ago when he was homeless. It has helped me and countless others. We didn't get funding this year, which is, it's problematic because we've been trying to reach out more to the homeless population. So we have, when we did get funding, we got $11,850, and we're able to help 9 individuals stay sober for 1 year and move into their own place. Hope I'm going to apply next year because the funding that we're using goes to the most vulnerable people suffering from addiction in our area, okay? In 2024, we lost 4 individuals, Matthew Mack, Corey Frederick, Jeremy Sire, and Adam Olson. 3 of them died homeless and alone from alcohol poisoning. One of them died homeless and alone by jumping off a radio tower on the Cuesta grade. These are the most vulnerable men out there. A large percentage of them were sexually molested as children, and they don't know how to deal with that except for substance abuse. And, you know, we've teamed up with lots of other people in the community and the recovery community to try and help these guys. And when you were funding us, it was very helpful, and I thank you for that. And I hope that the funds are freed up in the future. Thank you.
And that was our last speaker.
Correct.
Okay, so that brings us to deliberations. Councilmember Marks, I see your light on.
Well, this is a very difficult set of decisions, and I want to thank the Human Relations Commission for all the work and thought that has gone into these recommendations. I feel like a fourth grader at Los Ranchos Cinema. I would like to fund all of these 100% and more if I could. Now, I just want to say that the context in which we have to look at our city grants, as we all know, is a very unusual and hopefully one-time aberration with the federal government, as far as I'm concerned, arbitrarily cutting funding for a lot of human services that are vital. Our county is facing a structural deficit, or maybe a defect, and the state is also dealing with budget situations. So here we are, you know, at the bottom of the barrel, the last place that people know that there actually is real money that's been allocated for these human services. I think all of the applicants are really, they merit support. And I'm just going to read off the ones that have been recommended at 0. 5 Cities Homeless Coalition, Big Brothers Big Sisters, City Farm, Community Counseling Center, Family Care Network, Hospice of SLO County, Independent Living Resource Center, Kasim, Cal Poly, SLO, which is overnight camp, Literacy for Life, Middle House, SLO Child Development Resource Center, SLO Noor Foundation, Smart Share Housing Solutions, Tolosa Children's Dental Clinic, Transitions Mental Health Association. So in this situation, I have to say that I'm questioning the decision to change the recommendation on CASA from 0 to I believe 15,000. And I want to say that my husband and I have been CASA volunteers in the past, and I really respect everything that's that service does. However, yeah, it's 15,000. I have to say that in this very unusual situation, financial situation that we find ourselves in right now as a country, as a state, as a county, as a city, I think we need to supply direct help to the homeless, and especially the homeless who are here in the city of San Luis Obispo. So that's my concern right now, and I'd like to hear from other colleagues.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks. You said a lot of the things that I've been thinking. We are all in just, it's always difficult when there's a grant application process and there are always more requests than there is money to give. That's a pretty unfortunate standard situation that happens, but I feel like right now in this time, things are more dire than they have been, especially with the uncertainty at the state level, the cuts at the federal level, and then, as you mentioned, the issues at the county level that they are trying to work through. I want to really thank the Human Relations Commission because I know that this was a very difficult thing for them to do. I really took to heart the subcommittee's work that they did. You know, last year, for those of you who weren't here or don't remember, we did some clarification around the purpose of what this funding, this $150,000 small pot of money should go to. And we made a really clear decision at the council that we wanted to focus on homeless prevention. And so I think some of what you're hearing here from Councilmember Marks is related to that newly refined focus on homeless prevention. And so while all of these programs are outstanding programs in our community, and I'm so glad that they operate here, some of them have a closer nexus to that homeless prevention goal than others. And I really, as I said, respect the work that the commission did, and it's hard to say no to any of these organizations or to limit the amount of money that we give them. I had a little bit of the same concern about SLO CASA. I think that although, as we've said, it's a really wonderful organization, I don't know that it has quite as close a nexus to the homeless individuals or about to become homeless individuals in this community as some of the other proposals whose amounts were limited. So my proposal, my suggestion, I don't want to completely go back to the subcommittee's initial recommendations and not fund SLO CASA completely, but I would propose that we shift $5,000 from SLO CASA's allocation back to the People's Self-Help project that had been recommended for full funding, but was reduced in the final recommendations by half. And that, I feel, is a program that we know works with preventative services for homeless right now and has two very new projects that will house and are housing previously homeless folks right now. So that would be my recommendation, would be to decrease SLO CASA by $5,000 and put that back into the People's Self-Help project, just to kind of keep the focus on prevention as we have stated was our primary goal. And I'm open to other suggestions. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you. This is absolutely heartbreaking list to look at. And I echo all of your comments about the particular time that we find ourselves in. And I know we have visited the conversation in the past about potentially looking at this amount, and especially in this time. I know we have a limited budget as well, but you know, we are in a time of incredible need in our community, and I would love to see if we can add a few dollars to this pot moving forward so that we can give more funds to more of these organizations. I absolutely hear the nexus between our foster youth population and homelessness. Many of my former students found themselves in foster care and benefited from the services of CASA, and I do not want to defund them, but I know that we have this Calle Joaquin project that we have coming up here, and I think the reallocation of just $5,000 back to that would be a compromise that I would feel comfortable with there.
Yeah, thank you. Just first, again, thanks to the HRC for very difficult work of dividing up a small pot of money amongst a lot of deserving entities. So thank you for that difficult work and helping us to make a decision tonight. my tendency is to, is to generally support our advisory bodies and their recommendation, but given that the recommended changes are fairly minimal, and they're also consistent with the subcommittees, or they're not out of bounds from what the subcommittee had recommended. So I'm open to supporting those. Thanks.
Councilmember Marks?
Well, I think, I think what you're suggesting, Vice Mayor, makes sense. I personally would say $10,000 to the People's Self-Help project on Kaya Joaquin. And the fact is that these people that we're trying to help with that project are here in our city, sleeping on our streets. And we know from our residents, we hear it all the time, there's a great deal of distress that people have. They feel very sorry for this vulnerable population. And at the same time, they really don't want to be subjected to any kind of aggressive behavior from them or their dogs. And so it is an ongoing problem that is felt right here in our city. So anyway, I would say 10,000. I would not object to 5,000 if that's what the majority wishes, to decrease the CASA amount by 5,000.
So just to clarify, Councilmember Marks, are you saying reduce CASA to 5,000 from the 15 that's recommended and take that 10,000 and fully fund? Because the People's Self-Help the request was 20K and the recommendation is 10K.
Yes.
So you would essentially be fully funding People's.
You were far more articulate than I am.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm just making sure I understand the
That's
proposal.
exactly what I would propose.
Anybody else want to react to Councilmember Marks' proposal?
Yeah, I actually feel more comfortable maintaining at least 10,000 for CASA. While I know it isn't as direct, it is a really important service for homelessness prevention. I want to maintain some level of funding there. I think a $10,000 cut would be fairly dramatic from what they were expecting. And we can revisit this conversation moving forward, but I really would like to ensure that they have some level of funding to continue the programs that they have going.
And Councilmember Marks? You're still.
Is that a motion?
Councilmember Francis?
Thank you. I will make a motion to approve the recommendations of item 5D while reallocating $5,000 from the CASA allocation to the People's Self-Help project.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Francis and a second by Councilmember Marks. City Clerk, would you like to call the roll?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes, and the motion passes 4-0. All right, with that, we will go ahead and move to our business item of the night and give staff a moment to prepare. If it's all okay with you, we won't take a break. We'll just move to the item. Looking for, okay, I see thumbs up. So we'll go ahead and move to a public hearing item before us tonight, which is to introduce an ordinance adopting the CAL FIRE Local Responsibility Area Fire Hazard Severity Zone maps. That is a mouthful. Chief Tuggle and Fire Marshal Josh Daniel, please present the report.
Well, good evening. Let me get this set up here. There.
Are you going to do the honors alone here, Chief Tuggle?
What's that?
Are you going to do the honors here alone?
I'm going to do the honors. Yes, that's the plan for tonight. Up on this part of it, I will say though that
Just a second, Chief Tuggle. Can you turn?
Thank you. I just thought while Chief Tuggle pulls the PowerPoint up, I would help kind of kick off the conversation and perhaps frame it up a little bit for everyone. Trying to also provide a little bit of time while we get that up and running. First, we wanted to just kind of really acknowledge that what we'll be talking about tonight is the first of a number of conversations that we will be having with the community. Actually, it's not the first. We held a couple of community forum-related conversations, but this is the first we've had with the City Council. We'll be coming back over the course of this next year to do a number of follow-up steps. So we want to make sure everyone's aware that this is not the end of the conversation. This is really kind of the beginning. Even though the fire hazard severity zone maps that were created by the state were created previously, and this is really an update to an already existing map. The real difference is that the updated map is significantly different in terms of the impacts that it's going to have in our community. So the prior map that the city adopted back in 2011 identified only 38 parcels in our city that were deemed to be in a very high fire hazard zone. The new maps, by comparison, identifies over 2,500 parcels. So obviously, that's a huge difference for the people who live and own property in our city. And so we know it's going to take some time to understand what that means, to come to, for us to all come to a collective agreement about what that means, and then the next steps for how we're going to implement this together. Because not only does this impact our community members and property owners, but it does impact the city as an organization and the way that we look at managing our own properties as well. So, of course, recent events happening around the state, I think really kicked this process up into high gear, even though you'll see in the staff report, there's no, the state is required to update these maps on a regular basis, but it doesn't provide us a specified time frame. I think the events happening in other parts of the state, and in particular in Southern California earlier this year, really put a new, a real drive and reason behind and renewed look at this. So a few months after those fires in January, these new maps were released by the state. The governor also issued an order requiring a number of regulations to be put into effect. And so you'll be hearing more, not just from our city, but from a lot of other communities around the state who are struggling with similar issues. There are some guidelines in place for what this means for people, largely around what we call defensible space, also around what we call home hardening. Defensible space is really how we maintain our vegetation around our structures, and home hardening is really how we build our structures to make sure that they're a little more fire resistant. All those things will have impacts on the way that people build and the way that they maintain their landscaping and yards. We know that's going to be impactful because it's going to change the way our community looks to some degree. And even though the state has provided a little bit of guidance around what defensible space means, we have the ability to provide a lot more clarity. We just need to build that out into our ordinance and into a program, and then decide on how it is that we want to go about enforcing these requirements and helping our community through that process. So a lot of these things will be coming back and talking with you all and hearing from the community and the public and really working through this together so that we are being both understanding and of everyone's growth through this process, but also the goal is really providing and creating a more resilient community from wildfire, because as we've seen, it's a growing need, and we want to make sure that we're as safe as possible. And there are a lot of implications that we know are happening as well on things like fire insurance and what we see in bond ratings and things like that for our own needs here at the city. So just wanted to kind of frame that up. There's a lot of details. If you wanted to, you could scroll down into a hole for quite a while, and in terms of the terminology and how all the regulations knit together. We've been doing that for a while internally, and so just know that we'll continue working through the steps. This, again, is the first step that we are required by law to take, which is adoption of the maps, and then we'll be coming back with more details for you all to consider and for the community to give us more feedback on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, City Manager McDonald, for the splendid introduction. And I will jump right into things with that. Thank you. So one thing you'll notice is behind me is quite a collection of staff that were integral to putting this whole presentation and staff report together. So I am up here by myself because I'm going to go fairly fast, or as fast as I can, through the presentation so that we can get to the discussion and questions. And then I'm sure that the staff behind me is, you're going to ask questions that are past my abilities, and we'll get into the staff's contributions. But just as a slight, or just as a momentary acknowledgement, we have city manager, deputy city manager, natural resources, building and safety, planning, city attorney's office, city communication, fire marshal, emergency management, and our administrative staff in the fire department all contributed to this report. So it's a significant undertaking crossing virtually every department in the city, or a lot of departments, I should say. All right, with that, we'll jump right in. So tonight's action, after a very detailed introduction, after explanation that there's a lot involved in this, the council action tonight is actually super simple. It's very simple tonight. It's to hear the hazard maps from CAL FIRE and to adopt those maps, to adopt the maps as they are. There is discretion for council to expand the maps if you so desire. If that is the action of the council tonight, then we would go back, provide evidence of substantial findings for that, come back to the council for another first reading, and then come back again. That will likely push out our deadline of July 8th, and we could still meet the deadline, but there would be an extra time before you to make that happen. Staff's recommendation for tonight is to adopt the maps as they are, and you'll see in the presentation, and I'm sure you saw in the staff report, the impacts and the increases in number of properties affected is pretty profound. Also, too, I would say the council has another chance to relook at the map zones during the fire code and WUI code adoptions that will happen later in the fall. Policy context, the hazard maps were developed in 1992 based on an assembly bill following the devastating fires in Oakland in 1991. That established the zones, and the local responsibility areas were part of that distinction. So we have state responsibility areas and we have local responsibility areas, and local being here like in the city or the county. So those are our local responsibility areas, and those maps are actually different from the state maps. In 2021, Senate Bill 63 added the moderate and high severity zones to the local responsibility area maps where they were not previously. Government Code 51179 requires that the maps are adopted within 120 days. They were published on March 10th. 120 days is July 8th. And so we are on track to accomplish that. Our internal policy context, we have several policies within the climate action safety element. Won't read those out here for you. And then the map you're seeing in front of you is the map from 2011, which was adopted in 2012. And includes the previous just very high fire hazard severity zones. So what are the maps? The maps, the last time they were produced was in 2011. What has changed since then is climate change has happened since then. Also, technology has changed, and also we've seen urban conflagration and the destruction of communities since that time. So the maps seek to understand and map the hazard around vegetation that surrounds our communities and impacts the local responsibility areas. When One of the biggest changes that you're seeing in the old maps versus the new maps is the new maps include what's called an ember cast model. So what that means is that the vegetation, as it burns, it launches embers out into the air and down into the built environment, which then is what precipitates urban conflagration, the burning of structures, and the massive scale of loss that we've seen in the last 10 years. So that's where you see that zones actually coming down into the built environment, down into our neighborhoods, down into our structures. And as you can see from the numbers here, there's a significant increase in the number of properties impacted by not only very high, but high and moderate as well. So where we used to have 38 parcels in the very high, we're now at 2,845. That's a significant increase. Never mind the additional properties in the high and the moderate as well. So we've seen a massive increase. As City Manager McDonald mentioned, the maps have been in place for 12 years. What is changing now is the fact that how much of our city is now impacted by them. The regulations have been in place for many years. Now we're seeing those regulations impact us in a way that we did not before. We are in a little bit of a unique situation. There are not many cities in the state that are experiencing what we're experiencing. Many cities have seen an existing impact from the maps grow, but not at the scale that we're seeing. And many cities have actually seen their map lines just change. I think Atascadero is a good example of that, where the lines changed somewhat, but the number of properties and parcels did not expand dramatically. So what is required of our property owners for each hazard zone? This is a very quick table that shows what is required within each of the zones. And we'll cover defensible space, home hardening, and the AB 38 or real estate transaction disclosure. Certification of home hardening falls under the home hardening piece. But as you can see, the zones, you can see where each of those apply and to which zones. The reason that there's nothing in moderate yet is it just hasn't come in through legislation as of yet. I think we'll see what happens in the future with that requirement or with that zone. There we go. So defensible space requirements within the very high, effectively you've got the zone 0 as it's referred to, or the ember resistant zone. So this is 0 to 5 feet from a structure. The current regulations as they stand now is it's defined as an ember resistant zone. It doesn't give, there's not a lot of clarity or specificity to that, but it is an ember resistant zone. City Manager McDonald mentioned there was an executive order to establish the rules for the zone 0. Those are pending right now and expected to go into place in January of 26. Defensible space goes out from the structure out to 100 feet in 3 different zones: zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2. And that's 0 to 5, 5 to 30 feet, and then 30 feet out to 100. And it's progressively more intense fuel modification as you get closer to the structure. More on defensible space and the fire code requirements. This is actually coming out of the fire code, and these are requirements around new plantings that occur within the city and defining shrubs and trees within the different zones and effectively creating a barrier to fire, ember cast, and radiant heat from vegetation fires getting into that built environment and igniting the structures within our community. Within the very high and the high, we also have the home hardening requirements that are tied to the building code. So Chapter 7A of the building code is where our definitions lay for the requirements for home hardening or the wildland-urban interface building requirements. Just as an example, non-combustible roofs, attic vents, box eaves, you can see there. Those requirements are for the very high and the high, and one piece of the building code is that when 7A or our home hardening requirements are triggered by the building code, that also triggers the fuel modification or defensible space requirements within the fire code. So that's the reference to CFC 4906, that's California Fire Code, and that's Chapter 49, Section 6. One concern that obviously comes up with our property owners is what's the impact in terms of cost? And in a study from Headwaters Economics, they found that the price increase was somewhere between 0 and 5%, approximately $30,000 to $40,000 across the cost of a full construction of a home. I would add one caveat to that. Likely that cost is actually lower because within the city limits, we have fire code that establishes us as a community at risk that's been in place since 2012. And those requirements are very similar to what you're seeing on the screen, which includes our non-combustible roofs, non-combustible exteriors, attic vents, the WUI code attic vents, as well as attic sprinklers. Those things have been in place for 13 years. And so those requirements are already in place, are already a cost that are part of the construction within the homes within our city. And then there's the AB 38 disclosure. This is essentially a natural hazard disclosure on real estate transactions. And so kind of like similar to flood designations or disclosures, there's a disclosure around whether or not your property resides in very high or high, and then what measures have or have not been taken for home hardening. Impact of the maps in the development potential. So there's quite a bit here, and I will breeze over the top, and I'm sure there will be follow-up questions later about getting into some of the specifics. The report, the staff report itself goes into a great deal of detail about different scenarios. And for those members out in the public that are watching this, definitely would encourage going to the staff report for more information about the details. Effectively, there are limitations for lot splits and development potential within the very high hazard severity zones. And there are some changes to the ADU and JADU rules, as well as the SB9 lot split rules. And as I mentioned before, we have some planning staff in the audience that when it comes to questions, we can answer those in more detail. So those are the requirements of our property owners in the city. And as City Manager McDonald mentioned, there are financial implications. I'm going to kind of shift gears at this point, and we're going to shift into more of the conceptual concepts going into the efforts that are being undertaken. The financial considerations for what we were talking about today are very real, and we very much are cognizant as staff, and I know you as council, that going through home hardening and vegetation management requirements defensible space requirements has a financial impact. We are also in a situation where not doing anything has a cost associated with it. We are seeing that in fire insurance, and we are seeing that in our bond ratings at the municipal level. Not doing anything costs money now. In ratings calls recently, fully half the questions have revolved around what is the city doing to develop its resilience to disasters, specifically wildland disasters? What are we doing to protect the ratepayers? Individual property owners are seeing this impact as well. They're seeing that policies are being dropped or insurance is not available, and that if there are policies available, oftentimes it's predicated upon having defensible space, as we've talked about, and home hardening done to those homes. And when they are available, or when those actions are taken, there are discounts available for those efforts that are done. The FAIR Plan, for instance, offers a 5% and a 10% reduction in the policies for defensible space and home hardening efforts, respectively. And the CDI, California Department of Insurance Commissioner, in the Safer from Wildfires initiative, requires insurance companies to evaluate home hardening and defensible space measures when they're pricing and making available insurance policies. As a city, this is part of a larger resilience strategy that's predicated upon 5 pillars: vegetation or fuels management, defensible space, home hardening, emergency response, and community preparedness. And that is what collectively will allow us to be a more resilient community. It's not any one individual property. It's not just the city. It's all of us working collectively together to move towards creating a more resilient community. And our goal is to proactively exclude or slow the progress of a vegetation fire from entering the built environment, which could cascade into urban conflagration. And when we look at the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa, we look at Paradise, we look at Lahaina, we look at Marshall fire, which happened in December in Colorado on a sub-freezing day, and it burned 1,000 homes down. We're realizing that vegetation fires getting into the urban environment are creating disasters, and they have long-standing implications in lives, in property, and financial implications for our individual community members as well as the city as a whole. So a commitment to strong safety regulations, emergency response, and preparedness benefits the entire community. An integrated set of tactics provides whole community risk reduction. All of this buys us time as firefighters to stop the fire from getting into the community or stop the spread, and it buys time for our public to evacuate. So the first pillar is vegetation management and the open space. We own 4,000 acres of property, both within the city and outside of the city. That is a opportunity within the resources we have or can accumulate through outside means to slow those fires down. You see a wonderful picture of herbivorous fuels management. I believe that's on Terrace Hill, right in the middle of the city. That's an opportunity to slow the spread of fire from that vegetation down into the built environment. The vegetation management plan update is a safety element action item and policy. We've secured money from the Coastal Conservancy and have actually had a kickoff meeting to move forward on that plan. We're also looking for outside funding through the federal government and the state government, in spite of the budget implications we discussed earlier, to implement the plan that is in development through the Community Wildfire Defense Grant and Prop 4 fundings. Government Code 51184 actually exempts us as a city from open space or from the vegetation or the defensible space requirements in the open space. We also have adopted conservation plans that talk about a fuels management effort as well. And then, as I mentioned, we are seeking all fuels treatments, whether it's herbivorous, cultural, mechanical. Sometimes we use chemicals to get rid of invasive species, and also prescribed fire through our cultural prescribed fire efforts, which we did twice last year in conjunction with our local Chumash tribe. Defensible space and home hardening, we've already talked about that, but that is a critical component to keeping fire out of our built environment. We talked about EmberCast and how EmberCast can get down into our structures. And if it's burning combustible materials on or near our structures, that's how we start to integrate fire into the built environment, which we're absolutely trying to avoid. A keynote that came from a Verisk study of the Palisades and Eaton fires found that 80% of non-combustible structures or hardened structures survived the Palisades and the Eaton fires. That is a remarkable, remarkable stat. Emergency response is the fourth pillar. We are a relatively small fire department, 4 stations, 14 firefighters on duty a day. If we get a structure fire in the city, we are calling for help just to deal with a single structure. So now we imagine a vegetation fire and multiple structures on fire, and we are stripped of resources very quickly. On that note, we have a very robust mutual aid plan with SLO County Fire and CAL FIRE. We have a mutual threat zone, which is a half-mile buffer around the city where a vegetation fire automatically elicits a wildland response from our CAL FIRE partners. And the beauty of that is that it brings airplanes, it brings helicopters, bulldozers, wildland engines, hand crews, all the resources that CAL FIRE has to bring to bear on a wildland fire to help support the city in extinguishing those fires. We saw that in the Lizzie fire. We saw it in the Bishop fire as well. And those are just in the last 2 years. Community preparedness is absolutely essential. I mentioned emergency management. Our emergency manager is here tonight. We have communications team. We have a volunteer coordinator, all in sync on community preparedness and letting our community what to expect to do in the event of emergency. And as I said before, all these efforts are about buying time for us to get the fire put out and get our community out of the way. Here's some efforts that are underway: Ready, Set, Go, evacuations, know your zone, the alerts, and then the last thing up here is FireWise communities. FireWise communities are an opportunity for local neighborhoods to get together, working together to create a more safe and robust neighborhood at the local, at the neighborhood level. FireWise standing is also something that can have an impact on insurance. The Safer from Wildfires initiative recognizes community mitigation efforts, FireWise being one of those. The other happens to be the Fire Risk Reduction Community List, which the City of SLO holds with the Board of Forestry already. And that is something our community can mention when they are looking at fire insurance. And then the last part is public engagement. We've been pretty active so far. Open City Hall started March 14th, Community Forum on May 22nd. We've had a couple of smaller events at requests, one at a local church, one at Shumash Village over on Higuera after a community forum to help our community understand what preparedness looks like. And that will be ongoing. As City Manager McDonald mentioned, we've got a lot of work to do to communicate the current standards as well as the ongoing changes that you can expect over the next 12 to 18 months and then ongoing out for the next few years. Next steps and timeline. This fiscal year, you can expect the WUI code. You may not have ever heard of that before because it didn't exist in California. That will be coming July 1st. WUI code, the fire code, and the building code are up for their normal 3-year adoption cycles. You can expect a study session to discuss defensible space ordinance to help clarify for our community expectations. First reading of that fire code and WUI code adoption, hopefully, and then a defensible space ordinance adoption. Zone 0 regulations, as I mentioned with the Board of Forestry, will be effective for all new structures January of 26 likely. Spring, looking at programmatic and budget proposals to go to the supplemental budget to try and implement these requirements that are coming our way. Next fiscal year, defensible space inspection program, some kind of, we don't know what that looks like. As these rules and ordinances, we get these fleshed out, we'll have a better idea of what that will look like. And then in January of 29 will be the Zone 0 regulations will be enforceable on existing structures. And again, Zone 0 is that 0 to 5 feet away from a structure, ember resistant, non-combustible zone. And I'm sure we'll follow up with some questions about that for the community's sake. And with that, in 20 minutes and 57 seconds, I was able to go through the slideshow. I understand that was really quick. The staff report has lots of detail. And at this point, I'm available for questions, staff's available for questions, and looking forward to hearing your feedback.
And thank you for the briefing in advance, because as you said, this is dense, and I'm sure the community has seen this very brief presentation, but we have all gotten a little bit of introduction about this already. Just to clarify, you maybe mentioned it, but for those who were not paying attention for a moment or just didn't catch the acronym, can you say what WUI stands for?
I apologize. WUI stands for Wildland Urban Interface.
Thank you. And so I'll ask for questions from my colleagues. I see Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief. Appreciate the presentation, all the work that's gone in from everybody here on staff. Obviously, tonight we have a pretty simple task, but really we're looking at a pretty huge lift from a staff perspective on a lot of big changes coming to the city moving forward, a lot of planning for the future. First question that came to mind was, what are the next steps for our residents? What do they have to do now? What are they going to be expected to learn about and do in the future? What should they be thinking about right now, our residents?
Well, I'll cover the building and defensible space first, and then I'm going to pass it off to, I think it's going to be David Amini to talk about on the planning side of things. So from the building and the defensible space portion, when the maps become effective, which I think is going to be mid-July, I'm not exactly sure on the date. When they become effective, then any building projects within the very high and the high, any new construction or renovations that involve 50% or more of the value of the structure will require 7A compliance or the WUI building code compliance. That will also elicit the defensible space and vegetation management components as listed in the fire code, and that'll be section 4906. I will ask David Amini to maybe come up and talk about the impacts to development as they will exist when the maps go into effect right away.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. So as Chief mentioned, properties in the very high and high hazard severity zone have different constraints that are going to start applying to them. Staff is just evaluating how this applies to current and future development projects, particularly with regards to lot splits or ADUs or other ways that homeowners in our community are adding density to their projects. And so it's just a continual process of evaluating, every proposed scope of work with the different codes that might be applicable.
So what I'm hearing is that residents who currently live in high fire zones, if they're not planning to do a renovation or build a new home in that area, they're not necessarily needing to consider any of the home hardening things, meaning the siding that they have, the roofing, the windows. Those things aren't going to need to be changed on the home unless they're intending to already do a renovation project or build a new home. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So they don't have to worry about that element, but some folks will need to think about the vegetation around their homes, right? And when does that timeline kick in?
So that will take effect right away. Essentially, the regulations within Government Code 51182, which is in the staff report, and we will make sure that we'll share that information out on our website with the public. Those requirements will go into effect right away. And essentially, that's the ember resistant zone. And I'm here, I'll pull up the slideshow real quick. So this is straight out of the Government Code 51182. These are the basic requirements. And essentially it's trimming back trees to stay away from the chimneys. It's, getting rid of dead and dying wood around your structures, maintaining the roof free of leaves. We also have a weed abatement ordinance that is in effect across the city, and that already is a complaint based as well. So it dovetails fairly closely with what the 51182 requirements are, which is the annual maintenance of defensible space around structures. And then the other thing I would ask, the other thing the community can expect is that we will be the new WUI code rules will be out, and we will be working through those rules for adoption locally. So there's kind of this 6-month span of time between when the maps go into effect and when the new regulations will go into effect in January. So that's the very basic version of what to expect from the public, or what to expect for the public. And then we will always be taking questions at the fire department from the public if they have further inquiries about it.
Great. So if a resident lives in the high fire severity zone and these maps are adopted this evening, then they could proactively, look at these regulations as they exist and start to kind of think about some of the modifications that might need to happen to trees and plantings around their house. But we don't currently have an ordinance and inspection program in place yet. That'll be something that comes.
That is correct.
Do we have an idea of how long that might take for that program to come into place? Is that something that we expect in the next year, or?
Yes. Do you want to answer that?
Sure, happy to. So certainly by the end of the fiscal year, we anticipate not only having our defensible space ordinance presented for introduction and adoption, but also an inspection program that we've built out. It may take us a little longer to get the resources on board to actually start those inspections. A piece of the equation for us will also be looking at consideration of potential fees as well, since this is a completely new program that we would need to be staffing or providing resources toward. We understand that's impactful to the community above and beyond what they will be needing to do already to comply with the regulation. And so we'll talk through a lot of the different ways that we could maybe consider implementing that or potentially phasing in over time, grant programs, things like that, that we would be looking at. The other clarification that I just wanted to provide first, the maps, staff's recommending that if the ordinance is acceptable as presented or proposed by staff, we're proposing that it be introduced tonight. We would come back at our next meeting on June 17th with a proposed adoption. It would then be effective 30 days after that, so mid-July. The way that the government code reads is at all times, property owners within a very high fire hazard zone shall maintain defensible space of up to 100 feet. And so the challenge that we will have, or our residents and property owners will have, is there are some requirements that are very clear that we've stated from the code. A lot of the rest are more vague and could be clarified, and we intend to do that through our own ordinance. And so we'll be wanting to flesh that out a lot more, and that's really what a big part of the study session is that we'll be proposing to bring forward to discuss with council. The other piece, in addition to what was on the prior slide coming from the government code section 51182, and it has those basics around making sure you remove trees that are near your chimney, maintain your overhanging buildings free or things free of dead or dying wood, and make sure you're taking those easily flammable things like leaves and dead vegetation away. If you're considering putting in new plants, so the next slide talks, it's pulled from the fire code. There's a little bit more description included in the fire code around what is considered to be fire resistant planting, and you would be required to plant fire resistant plants. And so we know that if you're building new construction, you would be required to submit a landscape plan, and then that would help the property owner and the city work together to make sure that it's very clear what's considered to be fire resistant. If you are not planning on doing any construction, but maybe you want to, update your yard, if you're in a very high fire hazard zone, you need to take a look at what is considered to be fire resistant and some of these more detailed regulations about your shrub groupings, height, and your distance from your structures. So again, we know this is new information for a lot of people, and it will cause your homes and properties to look different. So we definitely want to help people through that process. The other one last clarification I wanted to provide is the Zone 0 regulations. So that's the space 0 to 5 feet from a structure. The state is in the process of creating regulations for that area. They haven't provided that directive and thou shalt go do this immediately or, in a certain period of time yet. The governor issued an executive order directing that regulation be completed by the end of this year. So that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that we are struggling a little bit to know how to fit it in at the best time when we bring back a program. We want to make sure we're being comprehensive, not only with the layers of state regulation, but our own regulation. And so that also includes things like our tree ordinance. So we want to make sure that we're helping people comply with all of the codes, and that we're not creating barriers through our own codes. So I provided an example, the fire chief and I were discussing as an example, if we say needed to clear things out of the creek because it caused a flood, and then having to plant 3 or 8 or 12 times as many trees as were in there before, it's a counterintuitive process. We don't want to create that kind of situation for our community. And so there's a lot of layers we want to make sure we bring back in a comprehensive way that's a little easier to understand. So there are a few things that we know and apply immediately, and then the rest we will certainly come back to provide more clarity. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, City Manager. So obviously there's a lot of unknowns and things that are kind of in the planning process right now. The state has some work. We have some work to get all of this information out to the public. But if folks are, curious about those plantings that are more fire resistant and those types of things, that information is available on the state fire code site, or where can people go to find that?
We will put that information on the city's website.
Great.
And the fire department's website in particular.
Perfect.
Natural Resources has some of that information already, but we will make sure that that information is on the city's website. It is part of the Chapter 49, the Fire Code, and there's a list of three items that would qualify that fire resistant or define that fire resistant vegetation.
Excellent.
For the public.
One last question. You mentioned the FireWise communities, which sounded like a really cool opportunity for neighborhoods to come together and potentially harden their neighborhood and then maybe even find insurance discounts as a result of doing that neighborhood hardening. Can you tell me a little bit more about how neighborhoods engage in that process? And is that something that the fire department helps neighborhoods navigate, or is that something through the state? How does that work?
So the state, well, the Fire Safe Council for the county, so every county in the state, or actually 57 of the counties, have FireWise or Fire Safe Councils, and they are typically the point of contact for that FireWise designation through the National Fire Protection Association. We have our emergency manager here with us today, a fire marshal. They're both aware of the programs, and we will be, if people have questions, if the community has questions, I'd encourage them to reach out to us, and we can help work with our local neighborhoods if that is a designation that they are seeking to find. We will also add more information to our website about the FireWise communities and help clarify that how to gain
Process.
that. Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'm sure my colleagues have a lot of questions, so I'll turn it over to them.
We'll go ahead and recognize Councilmember Boswell.
Thank you. Great discussion so far. Answered several of the questions I had, particularly about this sort of progression of how Zone 0, that we'll know more hopefully soon-ish. One question, mainly just maybe to reiterate for the public, it's my understanding that the state requires us to adopt these maps. We do not have a choice. The state allows us to expand the zones if we required, but we cannot decrease the zones. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I'll add one more piece to that, Councilmember Boswell, is that for the local responsibility area maps, there was not a protest period. So unlike the state responsibility area maps that happened previously, the local responsibility area maps did not get a chance to protest. So we got the maps published, or they were published and delivered to us on March 10th. And from that day forward, we had 120 days to adopt the maps as they are or to expand them. We do not have the option to contract or reduce the impact of the maps.
Great. Thank you for that. And then maybe just one other question for now. Have we heard anything, or do we know if there is the possibility for state funding associated with implementing some of these new requirements? One could argue it's yet another round of unfunded mandates from the state at a time when local governments are struggling to make budgets. Have we heard anything?
I can speak to. Do you want to add? I can speak to one piece of legislation. AB 1 is seeking to expand funding opportunities to help neighborhoods with home hardening efforts in particular. And we are tracking down every grant opportunity we can find. As I mentioned, two previous ones, Community Wildfire Defense Grant to help with that vegetation management. That's largely on the public property, but also helps with that buffer zone from fire impacting our built environment. And then Prop 4 funds are still kind of up in the air in terms of exactly how those are going to be allocated. Right now, it looks like it's going to be towards vegetation management efforts and workforce development, but that is just the first tranche of funding, $30 million to each of the to the Coastal Conservancy for disbursement likely in September. But that is mostly looking at workforce development projects dedicated to fuels management projects. So we haven't seen the specific funding efforts yet for home hardening and vegetation management or defensible space around private property yet.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Councilmember Marks?
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question about homeowners associations and condos and that kind of thing. When you talk about, or when they're talking about a certain number of feet from a structure or the property line, and then you've got like a homeowners association, I have to be living in one, so that's why I'm thinking about it. In fact, some of those photos that you showed were of a fire that was like maybe half a block from my own home, and thank you for saving our neighborhood. So, but for instance, in San Luis Ranch, the property, there are no backyards. They're just like walled courtyards. And then there's a fence. And then there's property that's owned by the homeowners association that's like a eucalyptus forest, which is way closer than 100 feet. But it is owned by the homeowners association, which each resident owns a portion of. In other words, it's common space. So how does the, this kind of, I don't know if you guys have thought this through or if the state has, but it's still a fire hazard.
Yes.
How would it work? How would that work? Because how do they define what the property? Is it just the individual unit or is it the common property for
I'm
the
going to
homeowners
phone a
association?
friend. I have a funny feeling somebody's walking up right. Maybe.
Nobody is. I don't blame
No. God, I got a couple. I'm gonna
Okay.
pass this one off, and
Yeah.
thankfully I have such a great team, or we have a great team here.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tuggle, Vice Mayor, and Councilmember Marks. It's a good question. I think your specific example has a specific answer, and I think how HOAs and defensible space interact may have a deeper answer as well, depending on the site circumstance. However, Chief mentioned when we were talking about vegetation management that in the code section regarding defensible space, Government Code Section 51184, that open space, habitat protection, scenic values, those kinds of things are exempt. And that includes lands owned in fee, like we own, like Bishop Peak, for example. But it also includes less than fee ownership, such as an open space easement. So for example, some of the sections that you're referring to at San Luis Ranch, and this is true also out by Spanish Oaks, and this is true at Rigetti Ranch, and this is true at other areas of town as well. Those areas would also be exempt. Now, I want to say that doesn't mean we should do nothing, that there's not a plan in place that doesn't prescribe how we look at fuel reduction, how we look at safety in general, while at the same time still accomplishing those protections of sensitive status species, things like that. So in the case of San Luis Ranch, we have a very clear management plan strategy there. And the same is true also for our own lands where we have conservation plans, which ultimately are directed by our general plan for how we protect habitat, protect sensitive status species, while at the same time attending to our vegetation management responsibilities.
Right, but will this change in the map change what we have already? I mean, are you going to have to look at that again? Or are you saying the way it is right now is already comports with the new maps?
I guess I want to specifically say those areas where homeowners association owns the land and city holds an open space easement along the creek or in the grove there, as required by the EIR and the specific plan for that area. And again, this is not San Luis Ranch specific, those areas would be exempt under this statute 51184.
Okay, thank you.
And there's still work to be done there
It's still
in terms of management.
It's still a fire hazard.
Yes.
Okay, I see we have the Community Development Director approaching the podium.
This is
Yeah.
quite a question. So thank you. And to add to that, there are also HOA spaces that are not open space. They might
Right.
just be common area. And so one of the things that we will have to explore is the nuance there between ownership. I'll hand it over back to the chief. This gets a little bit to a question that we've wrestled with, which is if my neighbor is very close to me or a different property owner like the HOA is close to me and their tree is too close to my home, do they have a responsibility to protect my home, right? Or to comply with this if it's off my property, but it's still within these zones? So that's a separate question. And then I will say, we will do our very best to also just educate HOAs, because I think that will go a long way for people to understand that this home hardening is to protect people's homes. It's in their best interest to ensure that their community is complying with these regulations. And so I foresee a lot of work that community development and the fire department have to do. We have many HOAs in the community, some of which are in the very high zone, that we'll have to do to work through some of these issues of who's responsible for what and why is it important that we are paying attention to these regulations. So that's kind of a high level answer, which is education will go a long way. Some of this is a little unknown. And then Chief, if you want to speak to the issue of, you don't own the property, but it could impact your home, what happens then?
Yeah, so for neighboring properties, well, the obligation of the property owner is to the property line. So even if that property line is within 100 feet, there is not an obligation on the property owner to go out past 100 feet. Conversely, if you're backed up to open space or even publicly or maybe community-owned property, there's not an obligation for that property owner to provide you with 100 feet of clearance as well. So that's where the HOA requirements get a little bit wonky, is what is the HOA responsible for versus what are the individual property owners responsible for? And I think that's really the root of your question, is where does the responsibility lay? And I think to, Director Tway's argument of if the tree is within 10 feet of the property, whose responsibility is that, or 10 foot of the structure, but outside of the property line, whose responsibility is that? And so those are some of those little nuanced questions, especially within the context of the HOA, that we'll be working to, first of all, clarify what the requirements are. That's the first step. And then secondly, how those get applied within the various property scenarios that we may have in particular HOAs.
No, thank you.
Can I just interject
yes.
just for a second? It looks like City Attorney, Deputy City Attorney would like to weigh in a little bit here.
Yes, I just wanted to note that while Councilmember Marks and Chief Duggle have both recognized that, yes, the responsibility does sort of end at the property line, other jurisdictions have by ordinance said that no matter sort of, regardless of whose property it is, if it's 100 feet from a occupied structure in a very high zone, it's got to be cleared. Not saying that that is what we would recommend when we come back to council in a study session, but we could, something like like the HOA situation specifically, cities are sort of authorized to enact more restrictive regulations. So that is something that we could consider as part of our defensible space ordinances, that sort of nuance of the HOA. So that is something that we would definitely consider when we, or, sort of evaluate when we come back to council on this.
Thank you. Well, you've got your work cut out for you, for sure. Here's another question. Our city hall, for instance, doesn't have defensible space. We've got a beautiful redwood forest just right between us and the Slow Rep Theater. And we've got trees that are actually brushing onto the city hall. So that's my question about, we've been talking about residences. What about businesses and agencies? And they're all structures. They all have trees. How does this apply?
Did you want to speak to the commercial versus residential piece? No.
I mean, I think it's, and maybe you're just giving City Hall as an example, but I think it's important to remember that these defensible space requirements are only going to be applying in the very high fire hazard severity zones.
Okay.
And yeah, the language of the statute is any occupied structure. So it's, it would apply to commercial, residential, other structures within the very high fire hazard severity zones.
And thank you for that.
Okay.
An additional piece to that is that there are specific guidance around caring for and maintaining specific species of trees. So in other words, if a tree is maintained in a good healthy status, there are some rules around that would allow for some exceptions. But keeping trees off of, hanging off of or touching the roofs, and also like touching chimneys and things like that, there is a mandatory clearance that must be maintained. And then one important thing, just in terms of fire safety, is the important thing. I was just having a conversation with the individual out in the lobby is, with these trees that are in our city, and we have a lot of them. I think there was a Tree City USA flag hanging today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
What causes trees often to catch fire is the ladder fuels. It's the fire that's down on the ground, climbing up the tree through vines, through shrubs, through bushes, that eventually gets into the canopies, and then you start to get what's called a crown fire. Or, we're starting to see individual trees torching. But those typically start from a ground fire that works its way up. So a well-maintained tree that's limbed up to 10 to 15 feet above the ground is a tree that is very, very unlikely to catch fire from a fire on the ground.
Well, that's good. That is actually my next question is what's the effect on our urban forest? I mean, are we talking about the Tree Trimmer Full Employment Act here? I mean, I'm just imagining, what is, because, we're all tree lovers, and our city is, and we are not used to looking at them as a dangerous thing. We're used to looking at them as a really important part of our environment and an amenity.
I really appreciate you bringing this up, and I'm really glad that you mentioned not just the the permanent tree staff or anything like that, but I want to bring up the fact that it's about maintaining the health of the trees we have. It's not about clear cutting large swaths of our city. That's not the intent. The intent here is to have well-maintained trees, healthy trees, trees that are part of our natural ecosystem, focusing on those trees that are part of the system. We live in an area that is adapted for fire. The endemic species here in our community are adapted to fire. The invasive species oftentimes are not. Things like arundo or bamboo or palm, they're not necessarily adapted for the fire prone environment we have here. However, our oaks are a very fire adapted species. So making sure that we're taking care of our trees that we do have, and then also planting fire resistant species that are ready and adapted for fires is a very important part of this. So I think in the long run, this actually helps us to create a environment and an ecology that I think we can all appreciate for its value and its integration into the broader ecosystem here in our city.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything more at this time, but I really appreciate all this hard work, and boy, it's going to be a huge lift for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think City Manager McDonald, did you want to weigh in?
Sure, just I'm looking at the chapter 49 of the fire code that does provide a little bit of assistance on looking at trees and what that might look like for everyone. And certainly glad to hear the reference to fire resistant species, because the code does allow for, there are some species that are more fire resistant than others. And so what the code says is that trees are required to shall be managed within the 30-foot zone of a structure. So if you have trees beyond 30 feet from a structure, I think we're less concerned about that based on what I'm seeing right now. It's something we could look at though in the 30 to 100 when we come back with more information, but up to 30 feet from a structure, They need to be maintained so the drip line at maturity is a minimum of 10 feet from the combustible structure. Horizontal distance between crowns of new trees and crowns of adjacent trees need to be at least 10 feet apart. And existing trees need to be trimmed to provide a minimum separation of 10 feet away from a chimney or stovepipe outlets, like we saw in the government code section. And then there's a reference again to a non-fire resistant tree vegetation. So this is where it helps, such as conifers, palms, pepper trees, and eucalyptus species can be permitted as long as they're planted and maintained so the drip line at maturity is a minimum of 30 feet from a structure. So it gives us some guidance. There's a lot of words in there and a lot of details, but it does help. I think it's possible or maybe likely that over time in these very high fire hazard zones, there will be less trees clumped together or less trees clumped near each other and near to a structure. But that doesn't mean there won't be any trees. And then we will need to, over time, again, look at the species that are being planted as well. So those details will matter, and we'll look forward to helping to all come together with that same set of facts and details and information for all of our property owners in the very high fire hazard zones in the future. And make it match with our tree ordinance as well.
Yes.
Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have another question. Well, Cal Poly is not within our city limits. However, it's pretty close. Does, Cal Poly have a duty to enforce all of this in terms of its structures, or like the unincorporated areas that are close to our city limits?
So the LRA maps, the local responsibility area maps, included unincorporated portions of the county not in the state responsibility area, and they are under the same state level guidance that we are. So the California Fire Code, Building Code, and the government code as well.
But Cal Poly is a state agency.
Correct.
A superior agency, state agency.
Yes, yes.
So we don't know if they, because there's, having lived really close to Cal Poly through at least 3 fires that I can think of that start on the Cal Poly land.
Right. So much of their construction is what's called type 2 construction, which is non-combustible construction.
Okay.
Not all of it, but much of it is type 2 construction. So, likely you're going to see their commercial construction that it far exceeds the residential code for home hardening. In terms of defensible space and vegetation management, I can't answer that question. I'm not sure what their standards are. I do know that behind up Poly Canyon and out to Miosi Ranch, there is a massive fuels mitigation effort underway through the California VTP, Cal VTP Vegetation Treatment Program, in conjunction with the city to do fuels work out there, which is one of our major fire pathways. Is a northeast wind coming down from Highway 101, blows in through 101, through Miosi Ranch, through Poly Canyon, into Cal Poly or into the city, through Monterey Heights or San Luis Drive. So yeah, absolutely, we are working with them closely on that fuels project to slow fires down before they get into the city or Poly.
It's good news. Thank you.
Yeah.
It also, just looking at the map, looks like the kind of campus proper is mostly not affected, but the outer areas, sort of the high and medium zone with a few patches of the very high. So it's not all bright red like some of the areas of our city where there's lots of parcels, unfortunately, are.
Right.
Thank you for all the questions. I just have a couple to piggyback on. Mostly I've concerned, like Councilmember Francis and some of the others, about the impacts on residents that are going to have to make changes to their properties. And in talking about the zone 0 regulations, I did notice one piece that I had a question about that hopefully you can answer in the staff report. It's on page 254, and it mentions that property owners will have up to 3 years to comply with the ember-resistant zone regulations, Zone 0, following adoption by the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. So I recognize the timeline that you proposed for when we would work on and how we would work on our own ordinances and have our own inspection program. But is there some sort of time limit under which people in those very high fire severity zones, when does the clock start where they technically would be out of compliance with something in 3 years?
So the Board of Forestry should be, I'll walk through the whole timeline just to hopefully put it into context. The Board of Forestry is expected to release the guidelines sometime this summer to take effect in January of 2026. Government Code 51186, I'm gonna look at the city attorney real quick to hopefully validate that, speaks to when the Zone 0 regulations go into effect 36 months after that effective date, all existing structures would then need to be in compliance. So essentially 3 years from the time those regulations go into effect or become effective, that's when all existing structures would then need to be compliant. So there's a 3-year grace period for that. So, and that includes things like wooden fences that come all the way up to houses, wooden fences that are within 4 feet, or between 2 homes where the setback is 4 feet or less. That would be, combustible materials within 5 feet. So mulch, bark, things like that. So once those ember resistant or Zone 0 regulations come out, there will be a 36-month implementation period where we will be constantly in communication with our community to get everybody up to speed on that and hopefully have some resources that we can bring to bear to help folks get to that point.
And that will be part of the fire inspection, the program.
Correct.
So hopefully we are able to have our program up and running not too long after those regulations are finalized, so that ideally people have as much time and knowledge about what they need to do with their properties as possible.
I think I want to bring up something that Fire Marshal Daniel brought to my attention, is that enforcement has an education component to it. And so to your point, Vice Mayor Shoresman, is that 3-year time frame is an opportunity for education. So even though an inspection program implies enforcement and that heavy-handedness, really that's an opportunity about education. And since we're already going to be talking to the community about one specific point about defensible space, it also offers the opportunity to talk about all of the points of defensible space. The Zone 0, Zone 1 and Zone 1 and Zone 2 also talk about home hardening, also talk about evacuation. So it's really an opportunity to get out and communicate and educate before we get to that 3-year mark in time where it's, that's when the expectation is compliance is going to be met.
Thank you. My other question is about the home hardening certification requirement. Do we know what that looks like yet, and does it exist already, or are there homes that are already certified, or what will that entail?
And are you referring to the certification on 252 in the staff report? Is that the language you're talking about under home hardening?
Yeah, certification. Yeah, I guess it's 253. It's similar to the table that you had in your report where it shows very high, and moderate requirements, and very high has all 4 of the requirements. There you go. And the third one there is certification of home hardening. Yeah, I guess I'm asking sort of contextually what that's about and what that will entail. And does it exist already?
It does not exist already. And it's something that is referenced in 51182 under homes that are damaged by fire. And then it requires a home hardening certification upon rebuild. The language is a little vague, but that's effectively what it's looking at, is if a home is damaged during a fire, that home hardening certification would then need to be entailed to get to finalize that permit, or when the permit is finalized.
So it's not required for every home, it's just required if if a structure has been in a fire already and there have been improvements to it?
I'm going to call a friend on this one, or my boss in this particular case. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. So the government code section 51182 speaks to the certification. It relates to both rebuilding a dwelling that was damaged by a fire in a very high fire hazard zone or before constructing a new dwelling. And so it's really ensuring that, you know, if somebody is not just going in for permits to build something new, but even when you're reconstructing in that area, that you're complying with the home hardening requirements. It also then requires the property owner to provide that certification to an insurer if they ask for it. So it's trying to help kind of, I think, loop all those pieces together to make sure that everybody's aware of the requirements and they're following through to help address the issues into the future, I believe. So I think this is a requirement that exists now. And so of those 38 parcels in our very high fire hazard zone, if somebody needed new construction or something happened, if a fire occurred there and they needed to rebuild, our Building and Safety Division would provide that certification because it would be part of the code process. It could be that perhaps even the permit itself is sufficient, but it is an extra layer that applies that's different, and it is kind of in the category of additional disclosures that are required when you are building or owning a home or trying to construct a home in one of these zones.
Okay, so it's not a certification that everybody who lives in these very high fire zones needs to obtain, and that's not on the homeowner to do necessarily.
Just a new building or a reconstructed building.
Right. And Deputy City Manager, City Attorney?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So I believe the slide was at about AB 38 disclosures, which refer to disclosures upon sale. So that's what those slides were referring to, which does not have sort of that trigger point of if it was damaged by a fire. That's upon sale of real property for homes that were, I think, built after 2010, just providing like a list of low-cost retrofits that are available for home hardening, as well as any that have actually been done. But that's, yeah, kind of a real estate disclosure that's sort of a separate piece. And there's also a disclosure related to defensible space, but that one's a little bit wonkier. But yeah, there are sort of a few layers to the disclosure requirements.
I'll add one more piece too. There is a certification that homeowners in any zone, any homeowner can get through IBHS, which is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. Got that one right, finally. The IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home Certification, it's something that can be obtained by homeowners, and that does help with the fire insurance. That is, and then there's an additional one, which is the Wildfire Prepared Home Plus, and there's just additional measures that are taken, such as the windows and the non-combustible roofs and the defensible space and all the different pieces and parts. And that's under wildfirepreparedhome.org, I believe. So there's that certification as well.
Great information. I don't know if you can answer this one because it's kind of requires you to get in the brains of the folks that make these requirements that are not necessarily you. But I'm curious about is there a reason why in the high severity zones, not the very high, there's not the defensible space requirement? It seems like that would be something that's universal if you're in a high zone. Any idea?
I hate to break it to you, but I actually know the answer to this question, which means I was in that status. So there is a loop. I don't know if a loophole is the right word. There is a spot in the code right now. It will be closed when the new WUI code comes out. But if you are constructing or renovating a house in very high or high, that triggers the home hardening requirements in Building Code 7A. Once you trigger the Building Code 7A, there's a reference to the Fire Code 4606, which is the vegetation management requirements, which are here, that are triggered by that building code, by that requirement for the building code and the building permitting process. However, the maintenance of defensible space is only required in very high. So you can see a scenario where somebody goes and seeks out a building permit, and then that permit in very high or high requires defensible space, but then the maintenance of that defensible space is not part of the requirements. So you can see where that whole, that little gap fits. And so to answer your question, you've identified a kind of an interesting gap. Now, the new WUI code is intended to change that. So it will close that gap where there's consistency, where if I was to build a home in or renovate my home in the very high or high, then I would also be required to maintain or I'd be required to implement a vegetation management plan in compliance with the fire code or the WUI code. And then I would also be required to maintain that. So I couldn't just put it in, get my building permit, sign off, permit a, certificate of occupancy, and then turn around and uproot everything and, grow bamboo in my front yard. I couldn't do that
Okay.
in the future.
Well, I am impressed that you knew the answer to that. I think that's all my questions for now.
Yeah, I had a question. This is all prospective, right? There's nothing retroactive in terms of the application of all of this. All of this is talking about what's going to happen in the future. Is that correct? Or is there any part of it that is kind of a look back, has a look back?
You mean any retrofitting, essentially? Is that kind of what your question is?
Yeah.
Mostly. So especially around the structures themselves, there are no retrofitting requirements as of yet. Now, we don't know what the future looks like. On defensible space, those requirements will go into effect. As City Manager McDonald mentioned, those requirements as they are listed in the staff report, as they are listed in government code and the fire code, those won't go into effect on July 17th. And then the other part of your question, to elaborate a little bit more, is the Zone 0 requirements will be retroactive. And that's where that 3-month or 3-year grace period comes in, is from the time they are announced in January, there will be a 3-year time frame to take out any wood fences that were installed, or decking is going to be a big question mark. Is what is the decking material made out of? So there is a little bit of retrofitting, but not for the entire structures at this point.
And the financial responsibility. I'm just thinking of these various subdivisions, like the one I'm in, but other ones where all of the fencing is wooden. All of the fencing.
In the wooden fencing, the combustible fencing is the only concern with that is where it's within 5 feet of a structure.
Yeah, right. Well,
that's all
like
of the fence.
closer than 5 feet.
So yes, that will be a concern. Yes.
So here's another question. Like when it comes to re-roofing, people do have to re-roof. Yeah. Is there any kind of requirement that they have fireproof re-roofing as opposed to cedar shingles or something like that,
So if going back to the renovation piece, or as the way the code reads today, if the renovation is 50% or more of the value of the structure, that would constitute triggering the building code for the WUI requirements. So as it stands today, a building permit in and of itself does not necessarily trigger that.
No, I don't think you don't need a permit to re-roof, right?
I honestly, I don't know the answer to
I don't
that.
know.
But I would recommend that if somebody is looking at re-roof, thought it was, what's that? Oh, perfect. There we go. Let me get bailed out on this one.
No, I'm just thinking that would be kind of an easy way to increase fireproof roofing, which is,
I believe it matters if you're touching the underlayment on your roof. So if you're just replacing shingles, you usually don't need a permit. But if you're doing more than that, then you need a permit. But always come ask us at the counter if you have a question.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
I would add, Councilmember Marks, that yes, if you're re-roofing your home, do a non-combustible roof. Definitely, as the fire chief, I would recommend that for anybody who's re-roofing their home. Metal roofs, great. Non-combustible roofs, definitely recommend that.
And it still would only be required in the very high and high zone, correct? At this point, as a requirement.
Yes, that is true. Well, actually, that's not true. So currently in the entire city, non-combustible roofs are required. So I need to reframe my question, or reframe my answer is, as a community at risk, we do require non-combustible roofs throughout the city, regardless of whether you live in a fire hazard severity zone or not.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues? That was a lot. You knew it would be.
Yes.
With that, I think we'll open it up to public comment. Are there any public comments?
No, there's not.
Okay, well, with no public comment, we can continue to deliberations. Is there anyone that would like to open deliberations? Councilmember Boswell.
Yes, well, as we discussed, there's not a lot to deliberate. State's requiring us to adopt this ordinance and giving us very little discretion over how to do that. So it's kind of business as usual. So I'll go ahead and make a motion in a second, but just a couple of comments. One, of course, is thanks to staff for putting together this great staff report. It was super helpful, and the briefing was super helpful. And thank you for your future work to come, because I know there's a lot more to do on this. I look forward to getting into that. Just a couple, just quick observations. This really, I think, shows the value of our open space program. It has lots of values, but now we have the ability, because we control and own so much of the wildlands around our community, it really gives us the opportunity to be proactive in thinking about how to manage that land in a way that reduces fire risk. If it was all in private ownership, we would be dealing with a myriad of private property owners to try to encourage them to do the right thing or meet the state law. So very happy to see that we have such a successful open space program providing yet another benefit. The second observation is just, I think I continue to be concerned, particularly after what we saw happen in Los Angeles, the tragedy in Los Angeles around wildfire earlier this year. I'm sure the legislature is not done on this issue, and we'll be continuing to be in a dynamic environment over the next couple of years. But the concern there is around funding for supporting these programs, whether it's costs that are going to occur to local government or costs that are going to occur to individual homeowners. I think, ultimately we recognize this is the right thing to do. We are in a new world with wildfire in California, and we've got to do much more than we were doing. We're seeing that play out in very real time. So I'm very supportive of doing more. But doing more requires resources. So I think this is something that as a city and all of us as individuals have to continue to talk to our legislators about not only regulating us around this issue, but providing support to us to do the right thing, to do the good thing to do. With that, I'll make a motion to, it's not up on the board, so I'll just say I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
We have one more comment, I think, by Councilmember Francis,
okay.
and then
Yeah,
we'll
then I'll make a motion.
we'll
Okay,
take
great.
your motion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't actually have a lot more to add to what Councilmember Boswell said. I think you summed up well some of the challenges that we face here. This is going to be a pretty dramatic change for a lot of residents in our city. Luckily, we have a lot of neighboring communities that are already going through this and have programs in place that we can learn from. This is also a really important step for the city in light of the impacts of climate change, the tragic fires that we're seeing. There's going to be some growing pains, and we absolutely need to be advocating for the resources to help us make the changes. But that stat that you shared about 80% of hardened homes surviving the Eaton fire, I think is a pretty dramatic illustration of the power of doing this well in our community. I'll be happy to second when it comes up.
I'll just make one or two quick comments and then we'll move on to the motion. But I just want to, take note that it was in the staff report and I think staff mentioned it, but this, we've got 38, almost 39% of our parcels in a high or very high zone. And now, according to these maps, and we had 38 parcels total before. So we're looking at, financially for the city and for the community members that now are impacted by this, a pretty big impact. So I agree with Councilmember Boswell. I sure hope that the state and the federal government, whoever can, will help support this, what is currently right now an unfunded mandate on the part of the city, but also that they will provide some relief and maybe some other grace periods for getting some of this work done, because it's going to be a huge impact on our community. And I'm also really glad to hear, though, that we don't have to remove trees around City Hall and that we don't have to stop our 10,000 tree initiative and that we may have to recommend some different trees for some of those spots, but at least we can continue to reap the benefits of tree canopy for our climate action goals and for the Earth's benefit in general. And with that, I will let the Councilmember Boswell make the motion.
One more comment.
Yes, Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you were talking about education, and it occurred to me that it's kind of like neighborhood watch, maybe in those areas where you have a cluster of the parcels that are in the very high or the high. That this Firewise USA idea is good, but perhaps the city also could, approach a whole neighborhood so that it's not just each individual, so you don't have, so you could educate people together and also create a kind of a sense of, yes, we need to protect our neighborhood. And so that I think that it would cut down on some of the resistance that might be out there if that works into your plan. But I think it would be good to approach, if we know where these if we know where these parcels are, it's an opportunity. So thanks.
Thank you. Is that the last comment? Then Councilmember Boswell, take it away.
I'll make a motion to adopt an ordinance designating the fire hazard severity zones as recommended by staff.
And Councilmember Francis?
I'll second.
Ooh, would you like to call the roll, City Clerk?
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis? Sorry.
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes, and the motion passes 4-0. All right, with that, we'll almost to the end of our meeting here, but we do have council liaison reports and communications. So I will open it up to my colleagues if they would like to report on the other activities that they have been participating in over the last couple of weeks. Anyone? I'll take Councilmember Marks first.
Okay, yeah. Well, on the 21st of May, there was an Air Pollution Control District a board meeting. That was Gary Willey's last meeting, and as I had said before, Carl Tupper has been selected. We approved his contract, and he will be starting, I believe, July 1st. We also had the budget update, and it's looking very good. We're managing to reduce our budget significantly because the Phillips Refinery down there close to the county line is being decommissioned, and so there's less revenue coming in terms of the permitting, but that also means that we don't have, we're able to reduce the budget. So we'll still be doing some surveillance there because of emissions. But I believe it's, as I recall, it was about a 10% reduction in the overall budget, which is what we're trying to stay lean and mean there. On the 22nd, I went to a show of senior projects in the Civil Engineering Department at Cal Poly. My grandson was one of the people showing his senior project, which is wildlife crossing over Cuesta Grade. And it was like almost like a problem set. The Cal Poly gave about 15 different teams of civil engineering students the data, and these teams did not talk with each other. It was kind of a secret, and each one came up with their own solution. And then this was like an unveiling of all these different solutions. And now Caltrans has got this information because I don't know if they have the funding, but it's in the queue as the next statewide wildlife crossing will be over Cuesta Grade, and it has to do with the amount of wildlife that gets impacted there. So that was great, was fun. And then on the 27th, the Integrated Waste Management Authority Executive Committee met. We're still in the process of, we've made an offer to a very highly qualified candidate, and we should find out at least by June 11th, which is our next meeting, if that person has accepted. Peter Cron is on, he has now retired, but he's been hired back as a sort of a subject matter expert, and he's also helping everyone to make sure that we're meeting all the state deadlines that we need in the interim. And tomorrow, there's a RAC meeting, Water Resource Advisory Committee, 1:30 tomorrow. So it's always interesting. So thank you.
And Councilmember Francis?
Last Thursday was the Nacimiento Commission. It was pretty light agenda, but we did have to shift some funds over that were left over from other projects to cover some additional costs on the Yerba Buena pipeline repair. So hopefully we can get that up and moving, and by this summer have our pipeline back and functional. Also had an opportunity to go to the Laguna Lake Dog Park ribbon cutting with Vice Mayor here, and have been back every day since to look at all of the very, very happy dogs. Sunday, I was able to attend the Trans Day in Meadow Park and get to see our city staff there and all of the different nonprofit organizations that were doing good work. Tomorrow, there's SlowCog and RTA. I'll be sitting in for the mayor and looking forward to a really action-packed agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember Francis. I will go ahead and give my report. On the 21st, right after our last meeting, we had a Homeless Services Oversight Council meeting where we were able to support staff's recommendation and the Grant Review Committee's recommendation to fund a safe parking program grant for CapSlow. So that is good news and will be something that they will be able to move forward on, that they've been working on for a long time with the city. And that evening, I got a chance to attend the Kiwanis 100-year anniversary party. They were celebrating 100 years of Kiwanis and had a nice dinner and learned a lot about the club. And that celebration was over off Los Osos Valley Road in the community, but it was of all the Kiwanis clubs in the whole area. So good celebration. And then the Laguna Lake Dog Park ribbon cutting, hard to top that. Looking forward to taking my dog over there again this weekend. And then last night, always a pleasure to congratulate the San Luis High School students who have completed a certain benchmarks in community service. So they got their community service awards. Last night, got to deliver the mayor's certificates as well as the school certificate, and a few of them also got a word from the president. So it was a full house, lots of community, lots of community service happening from the SLO High School students. And with that, I think we are at the end of our meeting. Our next meeting is June 17th, I believe. Next council meeting is June 17th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. here in the council chambers at City Hall, 990 Palm Street. Hope to see everybody here, and this meeting is adjourned.